Hello, everybody. This is Nicole Johnson Starr back again with the PTSD Retreat Radio Talk Show. I have Jurriaan Plesman with me tonight, and we're going to be discussing hypoglycemia. Now, if you guys heard the last segment, which was done just a few minutes ago, I had Pam Clean explaining about biochemistry and changing it through her program, and there was some pretty interesting things that are included in that. I'm still a little about coffee enemas, but hey. There's different things out there, and that's one of the big important things about our show. We want you to know that you're not stuck with just one option. There are many different options out there. You have many possibilities for treatment and for taking care of yourself, which is why the Six Senses of PTSD series is including multiple different opinions for each sense. That way you can actually make up your own mind with the assistance of your mental health and medical providers, your physicians, your doctors, your nutritionists, etc. So tonight, like I said, we've got Jurriaan Plesman. Tonight he's going to explain about hypoglycemia, but you guys get to know, if you have not heard the previous segments in this series, you really want to go back, because Jurriaan has a very unique perspective on PTSD, in the sense that you were a part of, you got to experience the World War II as a young boy. Is that correct, Jurriaan?
Yeah, that's right. What I wanted to say is that, yes, I had an experience with PTSD, but look, I'm 85 at the moment, and when I was sick with mental illness from roughly the age of 25 to 47, I think it was. And in those days, there was no such term as PTSD. They called it neuroticism. So I had nightmares. What happened is we were hiding Jews from the Germans in an attic, and we were not allowed to go on the street and so on. My job was to get food for the people who were hiding. There were two families who were hiding, about 9 people altogether, 2 fathers and mothers and children. And my job was to get food from the farmers, because I looked young. I was only 13, but I even looked younger than 13. So therefore they never suspected that I was 15, And so my job was to go to the farms, collect the farms, and they would say, well, no, we can't give you the food, that is too dangerous, but if you want to know there, and he pointed to in direction, there are the carrots, and there are the potatoes, and at night we are asleep and we can't watch our paddock, so it's up to you to come at night and get it without us knowing it. So that was my job. But later on in the war, we were caught, we all disappeared, we had all to go to a certain spot. Nobody knew where everybody else went when we were caught. But I finished up in Amsterdam in my mother's house, or building. It was a tall building, and I was in the top floor, underneath the roof, and that is where I was hiding with my brother-in-law, who was also hiding. We all had to go to Germany to work in the factories, And at night, I used to go over the roof on the guttering and to the neighbors. And I got friendly with the neighbors, talking, and they were French. And I loved to learn French. So as a social activity, I went over the roof. If the guttering would give way, then I would fall to my death. And my family was like, don't go over the guttering, it's very dangerous, you can't rely on the guttering. So this is where, later on when I was 25, I had my nightmares, and I was always hanging onto a guttering, on the point of falling to my death, and that was dreadful. That is the nightmare, Now nowadays I recognize it was post-traumatic stress disorder. In fact, my brother had it even worse. When we saw a film with a German soldier in a German uniform, my brother used to walk out of the room because he got very upset, and I stayed in the room. But anyway, I went in the hands of the psychiatrist and psychologist. I was put on medication, which of course didn't help. one of the medication, nowadays there's good medication for depression, but in those days I used tranquilizers. And in the end I finished up on Nembutal. Now anybody who knows about Nembutal knows that it's a very dangerous drug. The difference between dose and an overdose is very slight. So I overdosed quite a few times. But on top of that, I was in the hands of a psychologist, and since I come from a mother-only family, my mother had 6 children, was a businesswoman. She convinced me that my problem was I didn't love myself. I had a hang-up that said I'm stupid, and I'll come back to this in a minute. And so the psychologist convinced me that I had a hang-up because my mother was not capable of giving me mother love because she had to work and so on. Now, the other hang-up that I had was I'm stupid. Now, I'm partially deaf, my left ear is deaf, and the right ear is hearing, but I have high-frequency deafness. Now, that's a different kind of deafness than total deafness. It means that I can hear things, I can hear people talk, but I can't recognize speech because the high frequencies are in the consonants, not in the vowels. Anybody that does shorthand will know that when you write shorthand, you write in consonants, not vowels. So therefore, and I didn't know I was deaf when I was young, and so I finished up in a school for backward children because I thought that I was backwards, or I had retarded. I was retarded. And so I went to the backward school, and the teacher came to me and said, "You always make the same mistakes when we're in a dictation. You T's and D's and the S's, Z's and so on, and all the consonants, mind you. Why can't you hear the differences?" Well, I don't know. I'm trying to write what I hear. So then he got his watch out, and he puts it near my ear, on my deaf ear, or was deaf, he knew that was deaf, but the right ear. He said, "Can you hear this clock?" I said, "No, I don't hear anything. You should hear tick-tack, tick-tack." And they said, "Well, you are deaf." I said, "What? I'm stupid and deaf at the same time?" And I got very angry. But anyway, as a result of this, my mother sent me to a special school called the Werkplaats in Holland. They use progressive education. In other words, they taught children to teach themselves, to do assignments and work on it, and they also had the children also had to teach other children. Now that is very important for my development because in my therapy I use a technique of teaching people nutritional psychotherapy, and I said to them, "I'm not your psychotherapist, but you are your own psychotherapist if you learn the tools of psychotherapy. And you also have to teach it to other drug addicts." My first, when I got into therapy as a professional psychotherapy, I did a course at the university because one person said, "No, you're not stupid, you should go to the university." So I said, "Okay, well, I'll go to the university and study psychology." And after I finished studying psychology, that didn't help me at all. I wanted to help myself. It didn't help me at all. And at the time I was studying, I was on drugs, and nobody knew I was on drugs. And then the tutor told me, "Well, you must go into drug addiction." I said, "Oh my goodness, he knows that I'm on drugs. Isn't that awful?" And so he said, because drug addiction is going to be one of the major problems. That was in the 1960s. The upper class, the North Shores, they're full of drugs. The young people are taking drugs and they're becoming a problem. And we don't know why people become drug addicts. So I wish, if I were you, I would go into that area. I said, "Okay." So I went into that area, and of course when you become a therapist, you have to do more courses in psychotherapy. And I did a course in psychotherapy, which covered, in psychotherapy you have all the schools of psychology, the different schools. Now the idea was in that course to know all the schools, what they were, Jungianism, Freudianism, psychoanalysis, and so on. and then you had to choose your own method that suited you. Well, I was very interested in cognitive behavior therapy, and I developed my own theory there that is explained in my book. And so I got this employment for a drug rehabilitation center. My job was to train volunteers into helping drug addicts coming off drugs. And I was supposed to teach volunteers, but instead all the clients of the book that came to the book, they were from that state, and the volunteers didn't want to come. Because part of the presented was, and now what is nutritional therapy? It is, the idea is that if you have to realize that most of your hormones and most of your neurotransmitters, such as serotonin, they come from nutritional forerunners, precursors. So serotonin is made out of tryptophan. But in order to convert tryptophan into serotonin, you have to have all sorts of other nutrients, coenzymes, vitamin B6 and vitamin B3 and zinc and vitamin D and magnesium and so on and so on. But most people overlook the thing that what am I going to say? I was going to say something. That you need energy. You see, that is crucial. If you have to, in order to convert one set of molecules into another set of molecules, you need biological energy. That in biochemistry is called adenosine triphosphate. And I hear a lot of noise. Is that normal or what?
No, I apologize. That's my phone. It's beeping.
Oh, well, in other words, that is very important to realize that if you want to create serotonin in your body, you need biological energy, and it is called ATP. Now ATP comes from sugar, mainly sugar. Now that is where hypoglycemia comes into, because when I was sick, and I was on the drugs, and I was on the psychiatric supervision, and so I was on drugs, and then I did psychology, and I created a program called Positive Ego Training Program. It is in my book, Positive Ego Training Program, and that was a unique approach.
What was the name of that book again, Jurriaan?
Getting Off the Hook.
Okay.
It is on the internet. It is freely available. You don't have to buy it. Besides, you can't buy it anymore. It is on the internet, and it is on page 36, I think. And that is the psychological side of my book. Now, that concentrates on the ego, yourself, your self-image, as being at the center of your personality. In other words, if you have a positive self-image, you will have a positive lifestyle. If you have a negative self-image, you will have a negative lifestyle. Not only that, if you have a negative self-image, and for instance you are rejected in love, then that rejection can be a disaster, because now that will reinforce your low self-image. I'm unlovable, and therefore it is now shown because my lover, or whoever I'm supposed to love, has left me. So therefore, if you have a negative self-image and you are rejected in love, that is a disaster. And when you have a positive self-image and you are rejected in love, well, that is a nuisance, it is unpleasant, but it is not a disaster, because a person with a positive self-image will say, hey, I'm better than what I deserve better, and I will be looking for a better partner. And so you see the difference between what happens to a person with a negative self-image and a positive self-image. Now, so therefore, the self-image is very important in psychology. But psychotherapy, or the talk therapy, won't help anybody if your body is suffering from an illness that can't produce serotonin.
So you're basically telling people they need to take care of the inner issue before they try and deal with the other mental disorders.
Yeah, I like people to look up, it is on the video YouTube, it's by Jurriaan Ross. And she's exactly saying what I'm saying. Psychotherapy works if you have a healthy body. But psychotherapy does not work if you have an unhealthy body. In other words, if you can't produce, if your body is sick and can't produce the feel-good neurotransmitters like serotonin, then of course no amount of talk therapy is going to cure that, right?
Right.
And so therefore in nutritional therapy there's a principle that says biochemistry before psychology. And that is where most of the psychiatrists and psychologists fail, because psychiatrists have no clue, in my opinion, I'm sorry to say, in my opinion, they have no clue what causes depression or PTSD, and psychologists have no clue either, because they start off from the assumption that mental illness is what it says. Mental means mind, illness means sickness, so sickness of the mind. Now that is confusing symptoms for causes. It is not an illness of the mind, it is an illness of the body. And if the body is ill, you can't psychotherapize yourself out of that illness. If you have hypoglycemia, which is a physical illness, then it can't be talked out of hypoglycemia, just as you can't be talked out of diabetes. Hypoglycemia is the forerunner of diabetes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, but there's a lot of problems with hypoglycemia, why it is not accepted, and I will go through this in detail. The first problem about hypoglycemia is the term hypoglycemia, which means low blood sugar level. Now, when that was first mentioned, the first time I came across this term, when I read a book by Roger Williams called Nutrition Against Disease, and in one chapter, he said all drug addicts, and I was a drug addict at the time, I was on psychiatric drugs that were very addictive and I couldn't get off it. And I lived on these drugs for the last, 15 years. That all drug addicts are hypoglycemic. And said, hey, my ears went right up like a dog's ears. What's going on here? And that was new to me because I was a typical psychologist. I believed that depression is a mental illness and not a physical illness. So, and I was then working at the Center for Drug Rehabilitation Center. I was working there. So I went on the hypoglycemic diet, and suddenly I felt better. Not suddenly, that goes no suddenly over the time. I knew you had to take time. In the book said about 3 weeks, 4 weeks, you will find the beneficial effects of the hypoglycemia. Now I was on drugs. When you're on drugs, it is not as quick as that. Because when you're on drugs, either legal or illegal, that damages the receptors in your brain. That the receptors for neurotransmitters are damaged. Now, at the time, we were taught that the brain could not repair itself, that the damage to your brain was permanent, but that is not true. You can repair the brain by a high-protein diet, and it may take, depending on how much drugs you have been using, it may take 3 months, 4 months, and some very severe drug addicts, it may take one year. And if you want to know more about it, then you look up Nora Volkow, who wrote on this damage of the neurotransmitters. So I went on this hypoglycemic diet, and suddenly I felt going better, and it's amazing. I was still using drugs, but I was feeling better. So I told my clients, who were then, by the time all my clients were drug addicts, not the volunteers, they walked out, of course. The clients themselves, did my course, and they went on the hypoglycemic, and they also got better. Now, that is an amazing thing. So I was then concentrating on hypoglycemia. This is why I concentrated on hypoglycemia. Now, the trouble with hypoglycemia is this. Once it is the term hypoglycemia, which means hypoglycemia, low blood sugar level, it is partially true and partially untrue, because what happens in hypoglycemia is that your blood sugar, if you go on a glucose tolerance test, in other words, you're giving a load of sugar, and then they test your blood sugar level over 4, or we did 6 hours, we did 4, I'll tell you why, 4, because doing a glucose tolerance test is very stressful. Now, I was working in the prison population with violent offenders, and when you put a violent offender on a glucose tolerance test, you give them sugar, and then you measure him for 6 hours, he becomes wild. And some of them started to smash the instruments in the laboratory, you know. So
Goodness gracious.
the doctor said, "Oh, well, we're not going to do 6 hours, we do 4 hours to make it tolerable to our patients." So we use the 4-hour glucose tolerance test. If you want to know the glucose tolerance test, we have written it at our website, which is www.hypoglycemia.asn.au. You will find the text, how to test for hypoglycemia. Now, the term hypoglycemia is not right. What is really hypoglycemia is a fluctuating blood sugar level that goes up and down, up and down. Now, when your blood sugar level goes down, your brain, which is entirely dependent on the glucose for energy, senses this as a brain starvation. So when the blood sugar level goes down, immediately the brain, via the hypothalamus, sends a message to the adrenal gland to pour adrenaline and cortisol into the bloodstream, right?
Mm-hmm.
The function of adrenaline and cortisol is really to convert sugar stores in your body. In this case, I concentrate very much on on adrenaline, not on cortisol itself. But even cortisol, the end product is sugar, you know, glucose. Mm-hmm. Now, the function of adrenaline is to convert to glycogen, which is molecules put together of glucose. They're converted to glucose, and so your brain is fed glucose again. So therefore, whenever your brain senses a glucose starvation, the brain will trigger the release of adrenaline from your adrenal gland, and therefore you feel anxious. Now that is an endogenous stirring of anxiety. It is purely internal, right? And one of the problems is if you are stirred up into an anxiety because of the overproduction of adrenaline that comes from within your body, not without, we have a problem. Because, and in psychology, that is called psychological projection. Now, what does it mean, psychological projection? We are genetically programmed to look for causes in our environment if we have a feeling of fear. So when we have fear, because of the adrenaline surge in our body, we experience fear. And it's not, we don't know where it is, so we're looking at our environment, where the cause of the fear is, because we are genetically programmed to recognize, to look for the cause of the fear in our environment. If it is not in the environment, then you look up in the memory of your environment. Hence, now you see why we say, that was a traumatic event. Mm-hmm. I remember the traumatic event. When I woke up in the middle of the night, sweat, trembling, with an uncontrollable fear, I thought it was the cause because I was thinking of that guttering that was falling down. And at the time I didn't know, of course, about psychology or psychological projection. I didn't know anything about it. So my idea was, the cause of my dreams, the nightmares, is the guttering. right?
Yes.
So that is happening what in post-traumatic stress disorder. But then you have to ask the question, why is it that many people, in fact the majority of people that experience a traumatic event in their lives do not develop into post-traumatic stress disorder? The majority of people that experience a traumatic event do not develop post-traumatic stress disorder. Why is that? Because they are not hypoglycemic. And that is why, because hypoglycemia is a disease that is very prevalent. Not only are 90% of all your drug addicts are hypoglycemic, you will find that 90% of all your people with depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, we have done the test for this, are hypoglycemic, period. So now there is another problem in hypoglycemia. When we were testing clients with the help of Dr. George Semler in Cobra here in Australia, he did the test. He developed the test for hypoglycemia as distinct from diabetes. So when we did these tests, we found out that many other people, apart from drug addicts, remember, drug addicts, 85% of all your prisoners here in Australia are drug addicts, as a result of which they, of course, committed crimes. That is all over the world. You will find that the majority of prisoners are usually, the prisoners are between the age of 18, well, the adults, it's actually younger, but 18 to 26, 27, that is the majority of your prisoners. And when you look at these prisoners, majority of them are drug addicts. And when you test them, they are hypoglycemic, right? So, and then you have the other illnesses like depression, schizophrenia, violent or sex offenders, and even the sex offenders, when we tested them, they were also hypoglycemic because, for instance, sex is always precursor is depression. A person who is depressed can't socialize, he can't become intimate, he can't reveal his feelings for fear that he will be belittled. So therefore he has no social skills whatsoever, but he's, bombarded with this sexual drive that has no outlet. So, I used to treat sexual, I have an article on the website called Sexual Abuse in Treatment, and that will explain it all. Because, I don't want to concentrate on sexual offenders, but they are neglected. They don't know how to treat them, and because they don't know about hypoglycemia. The major problem with hypoglycemia is the definition, as I said. There's another problem with hypoglycemia. You will find that not all people that have the hypoglycemic symptoms prove positive to a test for hypoglycemia. In other words, the glucose tolerance test for over 4 hours. The test has been explained in our article called "What is Hypoglycemia?" But you will find that not all people test positive to the hypoglycemic test, and yet they have the hypoglycemic symptom. Why? And that was my problem, because I was working with my fellow psychologists who belittled me and demonized me because I had gone mad talking about bloody nutrition and depression. That was ridiculous. So and I couldn't explain it. Fortunately too, at that time, it was in the 1960s, so that's many, many years ago. He's now a friend of mine, but a person appeared in my group and he said, "Look, I have heard about your therapy, I'm very interested. I am an alcoholic and I wanted to do your psychotherapy group." He said, "Look, yes, I know psychotherapy is important, but I'm very much involved with the nutritional aspect of psychotherapy." He said, "Oh, well, why?" He said, "Well, a lot of people are hypoglycemic contested, but there are others that are hypoglycemic, have exactly the same symptoms, but don't prove positive to the hypoglycemic test. And therefore they won't accept my argument that people with emotional disorders are hypoglycemic. He said, oh, that is interesting. And so he got involved. And then he told me, fortunately, he told me, look, apart from being an alcoholic, I'm also a professor of biochemistry at Sydney University. I teach nutritional therapy, not nutritional, he taught toxicology. That was his job. But I think I'm very interested in this aspect. And we're going to solve it. Anyway, the solution was that you have to understand, when you convert sugar into energy, you're going through quite a few steps. The first 10 steps in the conversion of glucose into ATP is called glycolysis. 10 steps. So you have glucose, and then at the end of 10 steps you have pyruvate or pyruvic acid. And that goes into the Krebs cycle, and the Krebs cycle produces the ATP, or the biological energy. Now, he found out that if there's an imbalance between zinc and copper, because these have to be in balance, if there's too much copper and too little zinc, then the glycolysis is flawed. In other words, it can't convert glucose into pyruvate. Now, are you still with me?
I am still here, and I get to let you know we're actually kind of coming up on time, so just giving you a heads up, we can continue that next week if you'd like to go through those 10 steps of hypoglycemia next week.
Well, let me finish what I would like, because I'm in the mood now.
Well, just be aware that we're running out of time, so you've got a good 10 minutes to go, so go for it.
Yeah. So therefore, if you, and then we found out, we call it hypoglycemia. And I've written about it in my book. And Dr. George Semler, he invented the term hypoglycemia. That means that these 6 types of hypoglycemia, it is all in our article, which is what is hypoglycemia. Now the next problem with hypoglycemia is this, that doctors since 1972 have rejected the idea of hypoglycemia being a disease as separate from diabetes. In other words, in the American Medical Association wrote an article without any proof whatsoever that people that claimed to be hypoglycemic were just neurotic. There was something wrong in the brain, and that is all. So ever since then, the doctors have never been taught about hypoglycemia. So therefore, you're up against the doctors who don't know about hypoglycemia. If you don't know about hypoglycemia, you can't treat mental illness. You must know about hypoglycemia if you want to treat it. And that is why the doctors are not educated to know about hypoglycemia. Why that is, of course it is, because hypoglycemia can't be treated by drugs. And if you have a disease that can't be treated by drugs, doctors are not interested, because doctors' income depends on prescribing drugs. If they can't prescribe a drug, they can't make a living. So therefore, we have a natural antagonism between the medical profession and the nutritionist. And I would say that about 40% of all diseases, I just heard a talk this morning on the radio by a Dr. Michael Sharp. He did a study about diseases that could not be treated by doctors. And he found that the majority of these diseases were by neurologists. In other words, neurologists who deals with neurology. And they had the majority of cases where they couldn't identify or diagnose people with symptoms, and they didn't know what it was. And I thought to myself, isn't that strange? That if they were to know about hypoglycemia, then they would be able to treat it. But of course, hypoglycemia is a foreign word to them. They think that hypoglycemia is associated with diabetes. What is happening is that hypoglycemia is the forerunner to diabetes. It takes about 20 years maybe for hypoglycemia to develop into diabetes. If you don't treat your hypoglycemia, you're going to be diabetes anyway. in the end. And that is one of the problems why it is so difficult to get my kind of treatment for depression and things like that across to the professions. Because the professions, namely psychiatrists, doctors and psychologists, do not know, are not trained in nutritional biochemistry, so therefore they have no clue as to why people are depressed. And that is it's very frustrating. I've been in this for 20 years. When the Psychiatric Association in Australia found out that I was teaching nutritional medicine, they thought that I was teaching psychiatry. So they contacted the head of the probation parole service and said, well, who is this Jurriaan Plesman teaching psychiatry? The director came to me, are you teaching psychiatry? I said, no, I'm teaching nutritional medicine to my clients. And I reduce it to a very simplistic form to hypoglycemia, because when you go into nutritional medicine, there are many, many other nutritional diseases that cause depression, apart from and in addition to hypoglycemia. Now, I've given a list of these diseases in an article called Silent Diseases and Mood Disorders. You will find, if you read that article, there are a lot of diseases such as heavy metal intoxication, Crohn's disease, celiac disease, and so on. There's many other diseases that have hypoglycemia as one symptom, but are really caused by other diseases than hypoglycemia. But fortunately, most of the people that are mentally ill prove positive to the hypoglycemic test. So therefore, I'm very much involved with promoting the idea that hypoglycemia is at the bottom of most mental illnesses. And the advantage of hypoglycemia is this, that you can treat it without resort to drugs or even psychotherapy by just going on a hypoglycemic diet. Now, what is the hypoglycemic diet? I call it the hypoglycemic diet, but I call it really the natural paleolithic, the diet, the natural diet that we have grown, that we are genetically programmed to digest. And if you look at our food that we eat today, we eat rubbish. We don't eat food anymore. We eat rubbish, and hence a lot of people get ill. And if you want to find out why we eat all this rubbish, please have a look at a YouTube called the Oiling of America. I think it's Anna Enoch or Maria Enoch. That's right, Enoch. You have a look at that, and that is why that will explain to you that we have got away from our natural diet. We have got away from our natural diet since the 19th century, the 1800s, Since the 19th century, and especially after the First World War, our diet has been influenced by the food industry, and they have taken out all these high-density nutrients out of our food, and hence most of the people are now suffering from some sort of mental illness. And as the doctor that I heard this morning on the radio saying about unsolvable diseases by the doctors, that people go to doctors and they go from one doctor to the next, and they can't find a diagnosis because they are trained in nutritional biochemistry. That is why they can't find the causes. And I hope that in future all doctors are going to study nutritional medicine as a major subject, not as a 10-hour course at the university. Don Pemberton, the fellow who helped me solve the problem of hypoglycemia, he said, I teach only maybe 10 hours nutritional medicine at the medical school at university. People, that is not sufficient. It needs a 20-year study. I've studied it 20 years and I'm still learning. It is still learning, yeah? And the other problem is with the medical profession, that people are practicing medicine have no time to update their medical knowledge. Now, I can understand that because because when I was a probation parole officer, we were required to update psychology every Friday afternoon for 2 hours. So we had to go to a library to study psychology. Now, what happened then? That most of the probation parole left at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and went home. They never went to the library. And people are not, when you practice medicine, I suppose you get sick and tired of new ideas, unless you're really interested in medicine. I mean, I was very fortunate that I worked with nutritional doctors. Now, these are doctors that went through normal medical school and then completed a postgraduate diploma in nutritional medicine.
Which is an additional 2 years.
ACNEM, ACNEM. They're on the website, you can look it up. And these are the people that are trained, well, they are doctors, and then trained subsequently into nutritional medicine. So I was very lucky that I could work with them, and they protected me because, when the Psychiatric Association found that I was doing psychiatry, they call it psychiatry, they asked the director of probation parole to sack me because I wasn't allowed to do this. What he did is, he told me, well, you have to stop, you can run your groups as you do, and everybody's happy with my group, but you can't teach nutritional medicine. I said, sorry, mister, I can't do that because I can't lie to my clients. And if a client comes to me and says, the trouble with me is I wake up every morning at 3 o'clock and have anxiety. And I'm not going to tell my client, yeah, I know what is the matter with you, but I'm not allowed to tell you. I'm not allowed to tell you by the probation parole service that I know why you do this. So I said to my directors, no, I'm not prepared to do this. So therefore, they banned my group. So I was then, they didn't sack me, and it's very difficult to sack you for that. But fortunately, it was at the end of my career anyway. And I wrote my book, and I kept on. And the director told me, I don't mind what you do privately between you and the clients, but you can't officially promote nutritional medicine in your groups. I said, okay, that's it. And
Jurriaan,
yeah,
we're actually out of time.
oh, okay.
So we'll actually get to continue this next week, though I'd like to focus next week on the 10 steps of hypoglycemia that you started and you stopped because I told you we were cutting out of time. But so next week we can do that. For right now, though, thank you so much for being on the show, and to everyone else that's been listening, thank you so much for listening. You've gotten to hear Jurriaan Plesman talk about hypoglycemia, the diet, and a lot of circumstantial supporting information. And so he's left you a lot of information that you can look up and do research on. That's one of the things I love about Jurriaan. He doesn't say take my word for it. He says go and look up this information. He sends you lots of wonderful research so you can actually determine it for yourself. And I challenge you to do so. And Jurriaan, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Yeah, all right. I hope you enjoyed my monologue.
It's hard sometimes to talk from a monologue, but there's just so much information that you deserve to get out there, and I'm glad you are. And next week we'll continue this. And folks, just so you're aware, on the 1st there probably will not be a show, so just be aware there may not be a show on that night, just because on the 21st I actually get to, not the 21st, the 1st I actually get to go to Florida and speak on PTSD. So I will let you guys know how that turns out. And if you have any questions about tonight's show, you can reach Jurriaan Plesman. You can actually, he's on Facebook, so you can actually get him on his page. You can also Google him, and you will find a lot of information about Jurriaan, as well as you can also write to the PTSD retreat. The email address is support@theptsdretreat.org, or you can reach us at Facebook, The PTSD Retreat, or you can reach us at our webpage, which is www.theptsdretreat.org. Again, everyone, thank you so much for listening. This is Nicole Johnson-Starr and Jurriaan Plesman, and this has been the PTSD Retreat Radio Talk Show. Have a good night, everybody.